National order. Today, we'll take an in-depth look into what implications this matter can have on bilateral ties. But first, we turn to our Devin Whiting at Arirang's News Center for a look at the day's headlines. Devin.
Hi, Minji. We start at the presidential office, where two of President Moon Jae-in's top officials have been replaced. The finance minister and the presidential policy chief are out. And the hope is that their replacements, who are experienced themselves, will be able to help South Korea turn around its economy and implement the president's agenda. Shin Se-min reports.
A shakeup among President Moon Jae-in's top economic policymakers. President Moon on Friday replaced both his finance minister Kim Dong-yeon and the presidential policy chief Jang Ha-sung. Kim, who doubles as deputy prime minister, was replaced by Hong Nam-gi, who is currently head of the Government Policy Coordination Office. And the policy chief Jang was replaced by Kim Soo-hyun, a presidential aide for social policy.
Right now, the economy needs a boost, and by enacting innovative and bold economic policies, the new finance minister will be able to help the people and their livelihoods. He will continue to enact the administration's policies of income-led innovative growth and a fair economy as he works to turn around the current low growth.
The government is sticking with the president's push to build an inclusive nation, working as one economic team. Such a high-profile sacking was no surprise amid growing criticism that President Moon's flagship policies like the minimum wage hike and the shorter work week have backfired, with youth unemployment rates stubbornly low for months. And there had reportedly been discord between the two top economic officials over key policies and the recent economic difficulties. It's been one negative report after another on major indicators like consumption, production, investment, and jobs, which has caused growth forecasts to be slashed. And through the replacement of these officials, the presidential office is hoping to realize some economic results in the second half of the Moon administration. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Moon attended a meeting today of top government officials and civilian experts about how to make the economy fairer. In a speech there, he said fairness won't come at the expense of innovation. In fact, it will encourage it. The Fair Economy Strategy meeting was held at the COEX Convention Center in southern Seoul. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun reports.
In his speech Friday morning, President Moon reiterated the importance of ensuring that the working class, mom-and-pop businesses, SMEs, and conglomerates can prosper together. And to that end, he renewed his commitment to building a fair economy.
우리 경제는 이제 빨리가 아니라 함께 가야 하고 지속적으로 더 멀리 가야 합니다.
The Fair Economy Strategy meeting is composed of officials from the top office, the government, parliament, civilian experts, and business leaders, and they discuss the fair economy's future direction. A fair economy, along with so-called income-led growth and innovative growth, is one of the key pillars of the Moon administration's economic policy. President Moon stressed that the nation has seen remarkable growth thanks to the collective hard work of the people, but he insisted that fairness has been lost in the process and that the nation's achievements and benefits have been mostly concentrated among the conglomerates.
국민이 잘 살아야 기업이 지속적으로 성장할 수 있습니다. 공정한 경쟁이 보장되고 일한 만큼 보상을 받아야 혁신 의지가 생깁니다.
He also said a fair economy will be a win for both ordinary people and big businesses. Companies will be able to increase their international competitiveness through greater transparency and fair competition. People will be able to engage in autonomous and creative economic activities, which could also lead to the emergence of new growth engines. President Moon pledged that the government will take steps to fix unfair business practices to ensure equal opportunities and fair competition for all in order to realize a fair economy and economic democracy. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. have been saying the canceled high-level talks between North Korea and the U.S. were called off due to the North's lack of preparation. But there's also speculation the reason might have been their differences over the easing of sanctions on the regime. Park Hee-jun explains.
The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, says the planned high-level talks between U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his North Korean counterpart Kim Yong-chol was postponed by the North simply due to the regime's lack of readiness.
we continue to stand ready to talk. But I don't think that there was some major issue. I have talked with the administration, and basically what we're looking at is they postponed it because they weren't ready, and Secretary Pompeo and the administration stand ready to talk.
The two sides were supposed to meet in New York on Thursday. Despite the abrupt cancellation, Haley says she believes the talks will be rescheduled and that President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un will meet next year. But because the North hasn't taken any significant steps on denuclearization, Haley says sanctions have to remain in place. And according to CNN, that may be the actual reason the meeting was called off. Citing various officials following the negotiations, CNN reports North Korea was really angry the U.S. has yet to give them any sanctions relief. It added the North probably decided it wouldn't get much out of the talks without the U.S. making such a gesture. South Korea's Special Presidential Advisor Moon Jae-in also says the meeting was canceled because of Pyongyang and Washington's differences on the sanctions issue. Emphasizing the importance of easing the sanctions to move forward, he called on China to play a bigger role by discussing it with President Trump when they meet on the sidelines of the upcoming G20 summit in Argentina. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Diplomacy between North Korea and the United States might be on hold for the moment, but if the two sides ever get far enough so that the North's nuclear facilities are under inspection, technology might make that a lot simpler for the both of them through the placement of neutrino detectors right outside the reactors. Kan Hyung-woo has this report.
Verifying North Korea's denuclearization remains one of the biggest obstacles on the road to a peaceful Korean peninsula. Scientists from 15 institutions in 6 countries, including Seoul National University, the Institute for Basic Science in South Korea, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the University of Liverpool in the UK, have suggested that neutrino technology could be used to verify Pyongyang's denuclearization. Neutrinos are one of the lightest and smallest particles that travel at near light speed. Scientists say neutrino detectors can track power levels and fuel evolution in nuclear reactors. These neutrino detectors can be deployed to verify the shutdown of nuclear reactors without the need for operational records or access inside reactor buildings. Theoretically, the shutdown of North Korea's nuclear reactor could be verified with a neutrino detector in a freight container placed outside the nuclear facility. Such neutrino technology has merits for all parties involved in the diplomatic talks with Pyongyang. South Korea and the United States may value the temper resistance of the neutrino signal and resilience of neutrino detectors, which can reconstruct a nuclear reactor's operational history from incomplete data. On the other hand, North Korea may value a method for showing treaty compliance while limiting access to its nuclear reactor buildings. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, as widely expected, the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to leave its benchmark interest rate unchanged. It noted the strength of the U.S. economy, but also that business investment has slowed down a bit. A rate hike does seem likely, though, for December. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The Federal Reserve is taking it slow and steady, standing pat on interest rates for now at least. The rate will remain in the 2 to 2.25% range, but the Fed is signaling it will continue to raise rates gradually amid stable economic growth in the U.S. In its policy statement released on Thursday, the Fed acknowledged the strength of consumer spending was behind the strongest economic growth in 4 years in the second and third quarter. With borrowing costs unchanged this month, traders are fairly sure the Fed will raise rates in December. Experts say the decision will immediately lift borrowing costs for Americans with credit cards and other short-term loans. According to data compiled by Bloomberg, the market has priced in a 79% probability that the Fed will raise rates to a range of 2.25% to 2.5% next month. At the pace the Fed is moving, the rate will reach about 3% by the middle of next year, a level the Fed regards as neutral, meaning it will neither stimulate nor discourage economic activity. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Japanese politicians have been threatening to take legal action over the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling, ordering a Japanese company to compensate workers forced to work for it with no pay during World War II. South Korea's Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon has expressed deep regret over those and other remarks he called aggressive. He said they were neither reasonable nor wise, and that in a democracy like South Korea, the government cannot meddle in decisions by the judiciary. The PM said the Supreme Court's decision did not deny the treaty signed by the two countries in 1965 on compensation, but only clarified its scope when it comes to individuals. He criticized what he called an attempt to trigger a diplomatic dispute over the issue and urged a wise response from Japan. Now, for more, we have with us Professor Kim Yeon-wook from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Now, so following the court ruling in late October, Japan has been ramping up its criticism against the South Korean government. Now, Seoul says that it will draw up follow-up measures through a body comprised of government officials and outside experts. Now, we will have to see if those follow-up measures do ease the tensions, but for now, where do you see this diplomatic row heading?
Yes, I think the response by Japanese government is something that we have expected. This issue, forced labor issue, which has been finally, sentenced at the Supreme Court, is a very sensitive issue for Japan. But I mean, the response itself is something I think more serious than we expected. There was, a statement by Kono Daro, the foreign minister of Japan. And he expressed that this judicial ruling is violence, and the judiciary ruling of South Korea, the bilateral relationship between Japan and South Korea is now damaged. So some of the measures that the government of Japan is doing is trying to make a more serious diplomatic maneuvers throughout the world, sending messages to the embassies, and I think Japanese ambassadors, would try to, write some columns in the, papers, for example, in France or England, so on and so forth. So I think this is a very serious issue, and I think there needs some adamant and wise response by South Korean government.
So the Korean government has said that Japan can express dissatisfaction about South Korean judiciary ruling, but it says that it shouldn't be turning it into a diplomatic dispute. Now, how big of an impact do these judiciary rulings have on the diplomatic relations between the countries?
I mean, yes, it is usually accepted and as very sensitive magnitude. Usually the governments of relevant governments usually accept it seriously, but the formal response has not been this big usually historically. So as Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon mentioned in his statement that this issue is something that South Korean government and other external, experts would discuss further, and finally, the governmental opinion will be announced later on, and afterwards, that will be some kind of beginning line that the Japanese and South Korean government has to talk about these issues. So far, the Japanese government's response has been very preemptive. Has some intentions, I think. Maybe try to, with preemptive response, Japan, I think, wants to kind of induce the way South Korean government responds in the future into the direction that Japan wants to be. Maybe some other factors would be related to the current Japanese government being isolated diplomatically in Northeast Asia. It doesn't have a very good relationship with United States President Trump, and also South-North detente is kind of isolating Japanese diplomatically. So recent diplomatic behavior of Japan is that Japan and China, they have summit meeting. And I think trying to use these issues as an important momentum that it can overcome the current diplomatic isolation, I think.
Now, on that note, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is scheduled to visit Singapore and Papua New Guinea next week to attend ASEAN and APEC meetings. Now, usually it would have been conventional for him to sit down with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe for talks, but nothing's been arranged. How big of an impact do you think this recent ruling has had on this decision?
I think this kind of aggressive posture of Japan would continue until there comes a South Korean government's position. As Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeol mentioned, I think the South Korean government's position would not be that aggressive as the judicial ruling from the Japanese perspective, trying to mitigate some of the magnitude. And I think South Korean government was trying to manage these issues so they would not damage the bilateral relationship with Japan. So we'll see how it goes. But so far, we have to think about how we can, kind of soothe the Japanese, responses, which is too harsh at this juncture.
So you said earlier that Japan could be trying to set the direction of where to take these dealing with the matter in the future. But they're having reports that Japan may take the issue to the International Court of Justice and is also considering filing a complaint with the WTO over the government subsidies for Korean shipbuilders. Now, some say this is actually in retaliation. How far do you see Japan taking the issue for the meantime?
I don't think there is high possibility. I mean, Gonodaro, foreign minister, said that Japan is ready for next step measures, and they're ready to see what South Korean government's position would be, and also trying to pressure South Korea so that the government position of South Korea would not be that harsh. Kind of trying to mitigate some of the issues that is, stimulating Japanese government. So far it seems like these are some of the possible, policy options Japan has. For example, ICJ filing and also WTO issues, but from the current, position of Japan, if Japan does all these measures, the diplomatic isolation of Japan would be further, expedited. I don't think Japan would really seriously want these measures, want a more softened response by South Korean government. That's what I think Japan wants from South Korea.
So Seoul and Tokyo have a track record of sour relations over historic issues, like including the sexual enslavement issue. Now, the South Korean government has been pursuing a two-track strategy separating the historical issues from security and economic issues in order to develop future-oriented ties. How do you think the Korean government should be dealing with the issue this time around as to what measures should it draw up when it does give its response?
I think South Korea also has to take a two-track diplomacy in domestic issues. I mean, two-track, what I mean is that, South Korea-Japan relationship has to be more diplomatic. It should be dealing with Japan so that it would not damage the relationship with Japan. But domestically, have to take a little bit different posture. I mean, South Korean government has to take care of all the people of South Korea, which have been victims of forced labors and also, victims of, slavery and all that kind of issues. So, looking at Japan and looking at domestic people of South Korea, I think that they have to be different. That should be the postures of South Korean government.
So South Korea is in a sticky position. Moving to the North Korea issues. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to why the high-level talks between Washington and Pyongyang were postponed. CNN reported that North Korea is very angry that the U.S. wasn't taking any measures towards relieving sanctions. Now, this is quite different from recent remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump, who said that changes came because of other trips and he was very happy with what was going on with North. How should we be interpreting this situation?
I think the sanction issue is the reason that North Korea rejected the meeting with Secretary Pompeo. I think Of course, the schedule change by President Trump was something that happened, but I think that would not happen before the North Korean decision not to come to New York for a talk with Secretary Pompeo. The thorny issue between two countries is that the U.S. still wants a final and serious verification inspectors going to North Korea. At least that should be the one that the U.S. wants as a first step measures for denuclearization. As far as the Yongbyon facility is concerned, of course, the U.S. wants some other things too. For example, North Korea has to, provide the declaration of nuclear capabilities of North Korea. But sanctions, the U.S. definitely does not want sanctions to be lifted at this time with no progress of denuclearization. So those two issues, it's not easy to coordinate the different issues, different positions of two countries. I don't know what will be the future, but I mean, it doesn't seem such an easy issue. I don't think they would come up with an agreement easily.
In the meantime, North Korea state media lashed out at the recent decision by Seoul and Washington to launch a working group on Pyongyang's denuclearization and also to resume a joint marine drill. Now, do you see any message that the North is trying to relay through this?
These two issues are very important. First, the joint marine drill. That is something that North Korea has been arguing about the U.S. anti-North Korea policies. So there should be a stop of joint military exercises. But I think from the South Korea and the U.S. perspective, they need these kinds of drills now and even next year for the preparation of wartime OPCON to be transferred back to South Korea. Kind of a testing case for the South Korean military capabilities. But I think that's something that North Korea has been arguing as an anti-North Korea policies. And also the working group, this is something the U.S. provided, suggested, and the two countries come up and establish, which means that they will come and make a working group in which two countries will monitor closely if there will be any measures of the U.S. and South Korea that would violate the sanctions, the UN sanctions. So this would be such a big, obstacle for North Korean, endeavors to break the sanctions that is going on. North Korea always wanted to make a lot of holds of sanctions with South Korea, with China, and with other countries. But working group level, which means that the monitoring and controlling of the sanctions will be bolstered. I think this would be not happy for North Korea.
Now, there's been concerns that the delayed high-level talks between the two could hinder the developments on joint projects regarding the two Koreas. Now, there was a meeting today between the heads of the Joint Liaison Office earlier Friday. The first encounter since the talks were since they were postponed. Do you think the matter was brought up in any way?
Yeah, the Pyongyang joint declaration, joint agreement between North-South Summit meeting, they have agreed upon many things about the economic cooperations, but the content itself was pretty much restricted by the sanctions themselves. So I think in this meeting, I think the two countries can only talk about non-economic issues. Because sanctions should be lifted if they want to talk about more serious economic cooperations. The agenda, I think, will be pretty much limited.
I'm afraid that's where we'll have to wrap things up today. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our show. Thanks for watching and see you again. Goodbye.
2018 Overseas TV Audience Survey. Arirang TV and Gallup Korea are conducting research on viewer opinions. Your honest answers will be used for the development of Arirang TV. From November 1st to the 24th, you can participate in the survey through our website, www.arirang.com. We will send an autographed CD to randomly chosen respondents as a token of our appreciation. We are waiting for your participation.